Okay, small B2B and solopreneurs, client acquisition in the post-pandemic world. What has changed since COVID started? I call the summary of all the changes and the emerging trend of how B2B client acquisition is now happening. I call it the funnel and the pot. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, and this is a concept that you probably have come across already, but your entire total addressable market is on a spectrum from problem aware to non-problem aware, from having intent to buy to zero intent, not even being problem aware. And you can divide this entire group of the total addressable market along the line of whether they have intent to purchase in the near future. And if it's a yes, then they need to enter a sophisticated conversion funnel that guides them from being informed about you as a company, as a solopreneur, to converting with you. That's the group that needs to be in the conversion funnel. And the other group who is not problem aware, or at least does not consider the problem high priority enough, they need to get into the DemandGen Pot. And I'm going to explain all those terms as we go. But that is the whole premise of the idea, that you need to separate these two separate worlds. And while most people would agree with this and are already familiar with it, the clear separation and the sophistication of each of those areas is the thing that has not yet completely gotten through to people. And it's interesting because in the whole universe of solopreneurs and small B2B, the solopreneurs tend to be really good on the pot side. There's several small, like micro businesses of people who produce outstanding content, who nurture their community, nurture their audience with outstanding content. However, then when it comes to optimizing every single step of the funnel, that's where they tend to lack. On the other hand, small companies, who, especially those who have been around for a long time, they tend to have a decent conversion funnel. I mean, they're all about sales very often. However, what is suboptimal in their case is the DemandGen Pot. So the future is to combine these two areas and to have an offer for both types of clients, those who have buying intent and those who don't. So not many B2B companies have mastered it. It's truly an emerging trend. It's only become really apparent in the last 3 years. And therefore, it is a competitive advantage for those companies and solopreneurs who really master it. And the reason why it is relatively difficult is because it does require quite a departure from many old ways of client acquisition. And that sometimes can amount to a wholesale DNA change in a company, because as I will explain later, it requires almost building a media arm in your non-media company. And that requires a completely different mindset. The key elements of the funnel and the pot is understand where and how buying decisions get made in your market. Then create separate paths for high intent lead versus low or no intent audiences. Optimize the sales path with great conversion oriented content. That's the funnel. And then nurture the audience with quality content. That is the pot. And build relationships at scale. Abandon high volume lead collection, MQL, and lead scoring. And treat cold outbound as a transition until brand equity has gained enough momentum. Now, let's brainstorm what are the methods actually that exist for client acquisition for small B2B companies and solopreneurs. And I've listed the methods that came to me as I was creating this, and I listed them by increasing client acquisition costs. So if we start with probably word of mouth, right? Those are the cheapest ones, is virtually free. There's referrals, there's standard networking, and even connectedness of the founder, the CXO, board, investors, which is very often one of the reasons why certain investors are being taken on board, because they are well connected. So word of mouth is number one. Number two, organic marketing, which includes content and community. So for the high intent, there is SEO. And then for the low intent ones, there's content, which can include all kinds of formats, book, podcast, video series, webinars, and so on. And the correct distribution channels, as well as developing communities. Facebook groups tend to be quite lucrative if you do them well. Number three is institutionalized networking, paid or free. There are specific networking companies where you can join in order to get referrals. And then there's the industry associations, the chambers of commerce, and the like. Then there's events which include virtual, which are either organized by others, so the classic trade shows, industry conferences, or you can even organize them yourself, which of course tend to be, and now we're getting into real expensive territory. Paid advertising also is a very frequently used method. in the area of B2B, usually it's being done using the MQL method, which uses an ad that leads to a lead magnet, there's an email sequence, and it leads to a sales call. And then there's, of course, cold, standard, outbound sales. However, when you look at this list and you think back to the 3 major business purchases, what was your path to purchase? That would be my challenge to you. How did you buy? Let's look at them again. Was it that somebody referred you? Did you see an ad, download an ebook, and then somebody called you and you said, yeah, actually, I want to buy? Or was it a cold sales call that you got from someone? My hunch is that this is not the case. My hunch that one of your latest purchases, and let's say it would be something of $5,000, $10,000 or more, that the vast majority of those have now happened in the way that I am talking about, where somebody referred you, or where you saw somebody's content. Over time, you build up trust with them, and then you decided to invest with them. So essentially, my point is that number 1 and number 2, word of mouth and organic marketing are becoming more and more dominant as ways to find new clients, because this is also how you have bought. And so here we have to start thinking about what has facilitated this. Why are we so keen to verify with trusted peers? Why are we so intent on word of mouth? And why has content become such an important aspect? Well, it all has to do with COVID, of course. And I would claim that there are 4 trends that COVID lockdowns have sparked and accelerated. First of all is online first, events last. Even senior executives, LinkedIn skeptics, and determined handshakers are now online. And a partial reversal is, of course, possible as we learn to live with COVID, but 1.5 years of online only will have a long-term effect. People simply have gotten online, even the skeptics. Events will, of course, return, but I predict that they will not find back to their old level of popularity, as people have figured out good ways to find clients purely online. I keep seeing this. Who the hell needs events? Not everybody agrees, of course. I just would predict that they will not be at the level where they were pre-pandemic. So that's trend number 1. Trend number 2, greater buyer sophistication and a premium on trust, which leads to a decline of outbound effectiveness and general classic lead gen effectiveness. Here's like a sequence of steps that if you kind of buy into the premise, I think it's quite a compelling argument. So first of all, everybody during the pandemic has become digitally fluent. Even my mom started using Zoom, right? That's the standard stuff. So that means that even more older executives, more senior executives have started using purely online tools. They flock to LinkedIn. LinkedIn has seen some precipitous growth over the pandemic, which means that there's an instant connectedness with trusted peers from the past and your present. People who tended to be not very connected suddenly are part of the overall online peer fabric, which also has led to a rise of groups and communities, because just being on LinkedIn in this wide open sea of the social network tends to not really foster much trust. Only because somebody adds you on LinkedIn does not mean at all that you trust them. And that's why there's groups and communities where there's some form of vetting, where people have to answer a couple of questions, or they can only be invited by someone else. And it also means that this leads to easy vetting of products and services. Then this leads to a premium placed on trust and word of mouth, because suddenly it becomes possible that you can ask in a community of 25 CFOs, if you're a CFO yourself, who they would recommend to go with as an accounting software, for example, or which kind of financial consulting company they would recommend. And as a result of that, of the premium placed on trust, buyers become more sophisticated. They are able to research way more before they appear on a company's radar. And this leads to a decreased effectiveness of outbound and conversion-oriented lead gen. Now, this seems to a little bit quite abstract, but let me show this to you in a hopefully more concrete way, something that also will hopefully stick in your mind. And that is trend number 3, which goes hand in hand with number 2, which is product and service discovery now happens in the dark funnel. The dark funnel is a term coined by Chris Walker, not taking credit for that, but the definition is mine, which is the dark funnel is an emerging process through which B2B buyers increasingly decide what product and service they will buy. It is facilitated through a web of informal interactions among trusted peers and quality content that educates, informs, and entertains. It is, to put very bluntly, to put very in a very clear way, people are in a Slack community and there they ask who somebody would recommend to go with as a designer, and 20 people chime in and recommend a designer. That is part of the dark funnel. Or somebody is wondering how they can implement a more productive morning routine. Several people chime in. The people who have the best type of information for this person suddenly gain a little bit of trust. And then the likelihood increases that somebody will actually look them up. Oh, this guy's really smart. What does he do? I wonder. Right? That you gain this kind of insight about people based on the content that they helped you with. That is part of the dark funnel. That is the dark funnel. And so at the end of, as I said, that only once people have done their research, they emerge from the dark funnel and show any kind of intent. For example, they go on GQ, they go on Capterra, they are on Facebook, sees them as someone interested in a specific product, and then they get into that category. But this is usually the first time they pop up on your radar screen when they come to you and say, hey, I'm interested, let's talk. They've gone through this entire process in the dark funnel where somebody influenced them. And trend number 4, content has become a must. There's really no better way to win trust than networking without expecting anything in return and publishing high quality content that solves people's problems. Even long-form intellectually challenging content has been mainstream. Just think about what is the most popular podcast these days. It's Joe Rogan, who does 3-4 hour podcast episodes. Similarly, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are filling auditoriums, 12, 15,000 people with talks about philosophy. So the whole idea that you have to dumb everything down, and put it into bite-sized chunks is only partially true. Yes, for something like LinkedIn, you cannot go extremely long, but long-form content has actually increased in its popularity. And a professional media arm of a non-media companies has become a competitive advantage. So the more professional a B2B company can make their content and the more resonant with their clients, the better it's going to be for them. And content, actually, that's the fascinating thing. It builds actual relationships at scale. I cannot tell you how often I've already received the message and equivalents of that, where somebody tells me, I've been following you for a year and I feel like I know you because I publish regularly videos. I publish a podcast. I put out content on LinkedIn. I have an email list, right? So people get a lot of information from me and I provide it purely selflessly. I just inform, educate my audience. Of course, with the hope that at some point they will convert, but it never enters my mind when I post this content, that this is my ultimate aim. And this is this Chinese wall, this separation between the funnel and the pot, which I will talk about a little bit later. LinkedIn and other B2B social networks have become saturated and there's an arms race in content quality. So my question to you now would be, do you agree with these 4 propositions? And if not, why not? So number 1 is online first, events last. Number 2 is greater buyer sophistication, a premium on trust, and a decline in outbound and classic lead gen effectiveness. Number 3 is product and service discovery now happens in the dark funnel, and content has become a must. I would be curious in where you disagree with this if you do. So back to the dark funnel. I believe that understanding what happens in the dark funnel is the key to customer insight and revenue growth. It is so important to really understand what's going on in the dark funnel that if you're not in there, you will constantly be chasing after your audience and you will not be in sync with them. How to learn and have influence in the dark funnel. So you have to be present and active in these informal networks. You have to figure out from your target audience, the decision makers, where do they hang out online? That means, what do they do in their spare time? Are they on YouTube? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they in specific groups on LinkedIn or on Facebook? All of this stuff needs to be understood, where these people hang out. And then in those channels, you either publish quality content that helps your audience solve problems, and sometimes it is not appropriate, would not be appropriate if you come into a LinkedIn group, for example, and then started posting really valuable, helpful content. Some people would see this as too transparently you trying to get clients from there. But what is enough is sometimes just to observe what resonates, comment, engage, help out a little bit, and see what kind of content from others really resonates. This is how you learn about the population of a specific group. And the last thing, and this is why not many B2B companies fully embrace this methodology, is because you need to be willing to forego attribution. As you onboard new clients, you can, of course, ask them, where did you hear about us? And then you can sort of on a one-on-one basis, track their journey of how they came to know you and trust you. But there will not be, this information will not sit in a central dashboard where you will see at this touch point, that touch point, and then at some point they convert it. It's just not going to happen. So the dark funnel, if you accept this premise, it necessitates a split in the conversion funnel and the DemandGen pot. So I explained this before. There's for the 5% of your total addressable market, you need to create a really good customer conversion journey. And for the 95%, simply put them into the DemandGen pot. And why do I use the image of the pot? It's because the idea is similar to when you put peas in a pot or pasta. And so you just want to have them there. They are in the pot, is slowly boiling to perfection. And a potential buyer is in your pot when they enter your content orbit. Now, I'm using quite a lot of analogies, but I hope you get it. Like when somebody sees me for the first time on LinkedIn, they think, interesting content. Let me check out his website. And they go to my website. There they see this educational video, and then they sign up for my newsletter so that, they stay informed. And then they receive my emails. In these emails, I sometimes link them to a podcast episode. So they start listening to my podcast and all of that. That is now this person is fully in my content orbit. They've entered the pod and there they are. And the main reason why companies see their client acquisition cost rise and outbound activities fail is the following. This is a really interesting process. So somebody enters the funnel. They, for example, have one specific question. They have one specific burning problem. And they get through the funnel. They get influenced by many different people, many different companies. They ask for recommendations and they emerge from the funnel thinking, I probably have affinity for company A, B, and C. Through these informal interactions. That could be even as simple as a WhatsApp conversation. And then company D comes along and shouts at them by, for example, presenting them with an ad or cold calling them or cold messaging them, cold emailing them, that kind of stuff, right? The company D will not have much chances to succeed given that the person is already building an affinity with one of these three companies. And so the ideal conversion journey is actually where you need to be present. The pot needs to be present with them in the funnel, in the dark funnel, right? And the more and more affinity they build, that's how I'm showing this by growing the size of the pot. They emerge from the funnel thinking about you. They will be emerging, having already brand affinity with you. And then any shouts from company D doesn't really matter because they will have already built affinity with you. And then there's a very simple thing to put them in your funnel. So let's now look what are the requirements of B2B client acquisition post lockdowns. The funnel and pod framework, it asserts that the customer is in charge and they do their research about you before talking to you as a prospect. They look through Google, they look at your website, they make their own opinions based on your content, they ask peers. And that means that word of mouth and long-term relationship building mainly via content are extremely important. I cannot overemphasize this. The customer more than ever is in charge, and there's very few ways how to talk somebody into buying from you if they don't really genuinely want that. And then customer insights, actually knowing your target markets, pains and problems, they are paramount and they need to be supported by at least weekly, even better daily conversations with decision makers. And this is why it's so useful to be inside the dark funnel, communicating with your decision makers, knowing what they are struggling with, being a peer to them. Another important aspect is there really has to be a conceptual barrier between sales and marketing. They, of course, need to be ready to hand over leads to each other. That is clear. But they fundamentally address people with vastly different levels of pain awareness and purchase intent. It is this 5% versus the 95%. And I'm saying this because relationships can easily get destroyed by premature selling. Right? And word of mouth can be impacted. If you, in principle, have a good opinion of someone and they then start really hardcore prospecting you, then you may hesitate whether you would recommend them to somebody else because it's just considered not the best form. Sales needs an optimized conversion journey for the 5%. And then, of course, marketing needs to focus on demand gen. That is the split between the funnel and the pot. And demand gen is building a brand by assembling a dedicated, loyal audience. You educate, inform, and maybe even entertain. That is demand gen. And attribution needs to be deprioritized as much of the influencing happens in non-trackable channels. There's long-form content, there's Facebook groups, there's LinkedIn, there's Slack groups, and therefore you need to let go of the urge to attribute everything to a specific activity. Your marketing ROI will be seen on a more cumulative level once you've been doing demand gen, once you've been doing working the pot, so to speak, for a long enough time. You will then see the results of this because the client will come in, but you can only do that after many, many months of doing this. And there will not be a very clear, sometimes it can, but usually there will not be a clear, we've posted this piece of content, this new client has come in. Attribution will have to be rethought. And then finally, and this is often the bone of contention, it needs to be a C-level activity. There has to be a credible peer doing the content work and not just an intern or a junior marketing person. So how do we get started? What are the steps you can take if you buy into the premise and you say, okay, I want to explore this. I really want to improve my funnel, improve the entire conversion journey, and also start building a demand gen capabilities inside the company. What can you do? First of all, I would recommend that you fix the basics. That means looking at the positioning, working on the messaging, refining your USP and crafting a really good offer. Are these still relevant? Do you still have a pull? And figuring this out is whether you have still good positioning is metrics review. For example, customer lifetime development over time. Right? Customer lifetime value, how it grows or shrinks over time. Do people still resonate with what you do, or do you see that they're buying increasingly less and less? Also, conversion rates in the funnel over time. Out of the X amount of people who follow you or who you speak to, how many of them become clients? And then qualitative market research. You do calls with prospective clients. I call them the mom test calls after the book, The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick, which is highly recommended. And then developing a habit of being active in the communities where your target audience congregates. That is the dark funnel work. The next thing is to split the funnel. This is just a conceptual step to create dedicated paths, to decide to do that. Dedicated paths for the 5%, the high intent people, they go into the funnel versus the 95%, everyone else, the pot. And then do that actual work, optimize the conversion path for the 5%. And it's not just about one CTA. Of course, the very basic is that on your website, there's a clear call to action above the fold that people know what they need to do. So optimized landing pages is one part, but also the entire sales process review. Do you have methods that get people from one stage to the next? Once you, for example, had a discovery call, what happens then? You schedule, for example, a follow-on call, but do you have some kind of connective tissue between those calls? Maybe a quick email sequence or a video that you ask the person to watch. What is there? And what do you do when somebody tells you, okay, sounds interesting, maybe I will buy, but probably I will not have time to work on this in the next month? Then what do you do then? Do you also have an email sequence there? Do you have some kind of additional content that can help them? All right, so that is what I mean with dedicated content streams for prospects at different paths of the funnel. And the next point, that is the most difficult one, which is why I highlighted it. Create a media arm of your company that continuously creates great content and generates demand and brand affinity as a result. And when I say media arm, I don't mean that you need to hire 12 expensive content producers who will buy even more expensive camera equipment and go out there and shoot documentaries. But I do mean that you take it seriously as a proper aspect of your business now. This is not a half-hearted, oh geez, what am I going to post today kind of effort where you then just settle on putting up an inspirational quote. That just won't cut it anymore. This used to work, it doesn't work anymore. So there has to be an actual strategy behind your content, and needs to be a plan to it. And then assess if you need outbound to hit your goals. And if you do still need outbound, set up social selling or cold email capabilities and infrastructure. And if you don't need outbound, if you have enough cash in the company that you can keep going for a while, then focus simply on brand building. Focus everything on purely building your brand via demand gen and content. And the biggest mindset shift, this is the area where there will be some proper change management required inside the company. If it's a company, if you're a solopreneur, then can require a bit of a mindset shift for yourself if you've been more on the traditional side. That occurs in step 4 in content. So the requirements of this building a media arm in your company is, number 1, no sales messages are allowed in your content for your low intent audience, meaning no selling in the pot, okay? This is purely to educate, inform, and possibly entertain. Do not try to convert people. Then the best content comes from actual real world problems that the decision makers face. And that's why it's so important to be active in those communities where they congregate. We need to understand them and speak their language. For example, recently I saw a comment on a post from Gary Vaynerchuk where somebody said that they are struggling with the fact that they have cheap competitors, how to deal with that. And I responded at length. I gave them a breakdown of this. It's not important. What's important is that this comment, this question is an actual genuine statement of somebody who is struggling with something. And so obviously one of my next content posts will be how to deal with cheaper competitors. And I'm going to have the opportunity to expand on this in a bit of a longer post. Perfect piece of content. And again, I have to reiterate this. You have to approach it truly like a media company. The content becomes its own product that has to survive as a legit source of insights in the market. And this is a great opportunity, right? I keep phrasing this in a way of, oh, you have to, but look at it from the opportunity angle. There are people who would really pay you to give them advice, given your level of experience, okay? And so offer it to them for free. They will be very grateful to you that you're doing this. You just need to find a way to do this effectively and at scale, and you will learn this over time. But give it your very best. And then also be interested in what resonates with your target audience. Observe what people like, and then expand more on those kind of topics. It's all about both quantity and quality of content. There is no trade-off. You cannot post once a month. There's no way. And you cannot compensate for it by putting out one good post once a month and then the rest is being done by the intern. It won't work. You have to do both quantity and quality. And then I also say the CXO needs to be in the driver's seat. They, of course, can get all this operational support that they need. If you're a CEO of a small B2B company, I don't want you to be editing your own video content, okay? But as far as the core work, which is distilling market insights into what content the market needs, the topic selection, content creation needs to be the job of a C-level person, at least somebody who is truly credible as an advice giver to the decision maker. So if you're a B2B company that is selling to VPs of finance, VPs of finance will not listen to a marketing manager, to a junior marketing manager with 2 years of experience. There has to be somebody who has the same level of credibility as they do, otherwise they will not listen. Similarly, I could not be creating content if I were selling myself to CISOs, right? Or anybody who works in the topic of cybersecurity. I simply don't have the authority for this. I would need to get somebody for that, but it has to be somebody who's a credible peer. And that also means, because the CXO is now going to be in the driver's seat, a considerable reshuffle of the CXO's daily task allocation will be required. Definitely are tasks that a CEO does not need to do, where the selection of topics and creating of content for the pod audience is a more valuable task. The other day, I was talking to a CEO of a recruiting firm, small firm, 5 or 6 people, and she really told me that she spends at least an hour a day in her inbox responding to candidates who they've chosen not to pursue opportunities with. So just sending out, sorry, it hasn't worked out this time. I told her, this is something that somebody needs to do for you. You should not be doing this. It's not a good use of your time. And so if you do a complete audit of what activities you are engaging in on a day-to-day basis, it will emerge what you can cut. And I believe that fully understanding your market needs to be top priority of the company's C-level. The alternative is to hire a dedicated senior person who can credibly with the target market as a peer. The downside is, of course, what if they leave? An employee is more likely to leave than the founder, and therefore the continuity will then be broken, which is not great. And also accept that only self-reported attribution will be possible in most cases, no tech-driven attribution, but self-reported attribution is generally better anyway. There are several instances, and I'm listening to other B2B podcasts, and I'm hearing of people who say that they just run these kind of tests. They look at HubSpot, what HubSpot tells them where a certain lead has come from, and they attribute them to whatever, organic search. And then this person actually says, no, yeah, sure, I searched for you once, but the real reason is that I found you, I was listening to a podcast. Right? So self-reported attribution is usually way more valuable than tech-reported. Okay, now how do we actually build a media arm in a non-media company? This is not trivial. So let's look at what are the components of the DemandGen Pot. Now let's get into the actionable steps in step number 4. So you identify a senior person, ideally the CEO in the company, who is a credible peer to the target audience. You carve out 20 to 50% of their time to work on content. It's more at the beginning, hopefully less as we roll and as you become more experienced with content. And then dedicate one junior person to support, to either edit the videos themselves or to manage an external editor. By the way, editors are really, really cheap. Good editors are cheap. If you just go overseas, if you go to Pakistan, India, Philippines, there's great people there that you can hire. It does not need to be an expensive undertaking. Then craft a plausible content strategy. For example, there's a high-level plan. You'll create a podcast where you'll interview relevant people in your industry, and then you distribute the clips from that on LinkedIn and Facebook. Or you create a community for junior people who report into your decision maker and help them with their challenges. That could be the case, for example, if you sell into large companies where you expect to sell very large deals into a very senior person. It's going to be really difficult to quickly get these senior people to listen to you or to join a community. There it could be important to, because it's a long-term thing, it's a long-term sales cycle, to involve the people reporting to the decision maker so that they can internally influence the decision maker. That could be a reasonable step. It really depends on who you sell to and what you sell. And then you execute and adapt to what you learn from the market. This is a truly agile activity where if you publish, let's say, a long-form podcast episode and distribute the clips on LinkedIn every day, you can learn on a weekly basis what works and what doesn't. Let's take a look at who is doing this successfully. This is a great example. Dave Gerhardt, who's a chief brand officer at Drift, a 600 people B2B SaaS company. He started a podcast that grew to thousands of listeners. He's also created a Facebook group of relevant decision makers. He's very active on LinkedIn. Chris Walker, who I mentioned already as the coiner of the term dark funnel, he's the CEO of Refine Labs, a marketing agency. He grew his company to, I believe, 50 people now, actually. It's 50 employees with just the podcast and LinkedIn content. Mark Bernstein, CEO at Balto, 120 people strong SaaS company. They do podcasts. He does vlogs, as you can see here on the picture, and written content on LinkedIn. So this is a C-level activity that people are engaging in. It is really worth their time. And if you look at what are the consequences of ignoring this trend, you can, of course, choose to say no to this. But just to give you a full picture, I do believe that you will see continuously rising client acquisition costs. And also you'll be constantly chasing after new channels as they get saturated, right? So you will learn, okay, Facebook ads with a webinar link are now the thing. Okay, so you do that, but over time you see that the client acquisition costs are increasing because other people are jumping on the same bandwagon. It also will lead to transactional client acquisition, this kind of effect of burning straw for fire. You're not building a brand asset. You just need to constantly feed the machine, whichever it is, that if it's Facebook ads, you will constantly need to feed the Facebook machine ad money. And if you stop, client acquisition will stop. If you do a great demand gen practice for 2 years, the clients will keep coming. Sure, if you don't feed it, then over time, it's also going to tail off, but it's going to tail off. It's not going to just stop abruptly, like if you only relied on ads. A huge downside is lack of understanding of the customer, lack of market insight. These kind of conversations, even if you don't acquire clients with it for a half a year, for example, which can happen, absolutely, you will still get great insights because you talk to people, you see what they are concerned with, you get them on a podcast where you interview them and all of that. That is going to create great market insight for you. And then you'll miss out on catching the wave early. This is really an emerging trend now, with a bunch of solopreneurs are already doing this, but B2B companies are slow to catch on but the few who are catching on, they have really great results. And it takes a while to figure out anyway. So just don't lose time, get on that train and try it. And why I believe this is not a fad is because it just makes sense. The idea of you as the expert in your field, going out there, sharing your insights, educating your market, and therefore building brand affinity, it just makes so much sense. If you ask, like, what is probably the best, the most ethical way of marketing, it is this. And now finally, we are getting to the point where this is getting traction among many companies. So it is definitely something I would recommend to do. So final slide, what are the benefits of the funnel and pot approach? First of all, you'll have this sense of being in sync with your target audience. You're not chasing after them. You'll also be at the forefront of your industry. You'll be the first to hear signals from your market to change your product. This kind of habit of being in the dark funnel, of listening to people, of conducting interviews with them, this kind of regular being in touch with your target clients will mean that also you'll get great information about what is required on the product side, not just on the marketing side. It also will mean more inbound clients, which is great. You'll also be building a brand assets, which will bear fruit in the long run. And you'll have the opportunity for true hockey stick growth and falling client acquisition costs. This is the ultimately scalable client acquisition methodology, because as you grow and as you build your audience, your reach will increase at no extra cost. And therefore, the average lead that then comes to you will have been acquired at a much lower cost per capita. So that is the truly most scalable way of driving new business. And that's it. I hope it was useful. If you have found this insightful and you're wondering if this could be something for you, if this whole funnel and pot world would be a useful addition to your marketing mix, and you could imagine transforming your company in this way, then schedule a call below this video. We can get to know each other and we can see if we could be a potential fit to work together. And if not, if you consider yourself to be part of my pot audience, then feel free to keep browsing the site, subscribe to my twice weekly emails, and I look forward to staying in touch with you in this way.